Ryan Proffitt, he's the head of the North Carolina Association of Educators. That's a 43,000 member teachers union there. And he is a revolutionary socialist. Yeah. We are revolutionary. So this is a statement for Proffitt's Liberation Road. We are revolutionary socialists in the U.S. dedicated to fighting for a social system where social wealth is not in the hands of a few billionaires, but is controlled by the people. Liberation Road also goes on to say, using the framework of the United Front, we identify the new Confederacy, composed of mostly of the most reactionary faction of capital and middle strata, right-wing racists united in the Republican Party as the main enemy. We use this term to emphasize the fact that the right in this country is rooted in a racist program and strategy. And he goes on to talk about how he really enjoys the teachings of Mao and so on and so forth. Representing 43,000 teachers educating kids in North Carolina. But tell me again how this cultural Marxists aren't in charge of K through 12 education, generally speaking, in this country, and why you're confused as to what that has wrought. Oh, and by the way, since we're at the end of Black Lives Matter in the classroom week, for those of you who have kids actually in the classroom this week, just thought I'd tell you just exactly how far their critical race theory, which is just a front for cultural Marxism, is going. The Lives and Deaths of Shelter Animals, a new book by a CRTist named Katja Gunther, claims that dogs are being killed in shelters because of, quote, capitalism, anthroparchy, white supremacy, and patriarchy. She argues that allowing dogs to sleep inside is a privilege reserved for the white and the wealthy, and that policies against keeping dogs chained up in backyards are intended to oppress people of color by imposing, quote, middle-class norms of animal keeping in which companion animals are considered family and treated accordingly. And that is not only racist, it ignores the fact that people of color are, quote, themselves trapped in poverty, may have few options for legitimate income generation, and possibly rely on dogs for status. Seriously.
Okay. Bit of a stretch.
That's where critical race theory goes. For all those people running around thinking they're serious, and have you read Robin DiAngelo? Have you heard of Ibram Kendi? Ta-Nehisi Coates, what a brilliant mind he is. Let's bring him to our school district to address an assembly we'll cobble together, say the rich, guilty, vacuous, white leftists in suburban America. Well, these are the same people. Keeping a dog in your home is the indicia of privilege. It's racist because many people of color can't. It also, of course, is a cartoonish caricature of people of color in this country, which is what the left is really doing, and that seems to never get properly called, as if there are no people of color in this country who are wildly wealthy, much less middle-income families. It's actually where the bulk of, for example, African-American families find themselves, in the middle-income quintiles. But anyway, just so you know, we're not making it up. We're just repeating their words to our audience. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Sam Sorbo. She is a filmmaker, radio host, actress, international activist, and author. She hosts the weekly nationally syndicated radio program and podcast, The Sam Sorbo Show, and she's the author of They're Your Kids, Teach from Love and True Faith, which she co-authored with her husband, also an actor, of course, Kevin Sorbo. She's got a new book, Words for Warriors, Fight Back Against Crazy Socialists and the Toxic Liberal Left, which is perfect.
Yeah, that's a handbook here in Chicago, right?
Well, also, yeah, I don't know. Maybe she'll have time to do a second volume if she didn't tackle the critical race theory for dogs, if she didn't get to that in this book. Sam Sorbo, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. You guys are a hoot. It's just amazing. And you heard PETA came out and said, don't call people chicken.
Yeah.
That's speciesist.
Speciesist.
I
Yeah.
can't even say it, right?
That's right.
And you need to call them cowards. And I said, well, what about the cows?
Uh-oh.
Right. Yes. No. You can't.
Bovines.
Right. You can't. You can't be calling. Right. You can't be using animal designations to impugn human beings. That's
Right,
exactly
like
right.
You know
snake,
what?
cow. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
This would be so laughable if they weren't so deadly serious. And I mean deadly, because they are deadly and they're serious. And this is what we call liberal fascism. It's basically, so political correctness is fascism of language. It is dictating to you what you may and may not say. So we have lost our freedom of speech because you and I both know there are certain things that you cannot say. And I'm not saying, you can't say swear words on the air because that's just an FCC thing or whatever. There are words that we are not allowed to utter because of political correctness, which is fascism of language. So, my book, Words for Warriors, it pokes fun at that, but it also has a serious bent, and it talks about this. And for instance, fascism, the word itself, this is something that I really am trying to get across to people. There is nothing about fascism that is in any way, shape, or form right wing. Okay, fascists are left wing. Antifa, which is funny because it's supposed to stand for anti-fascist, they are the worst fascists of all. And so we really need to take our language back and stop allowing the left to basically hijack our words and then turn them against us somehow. We have to stop allowing that to happen.
Right. Like remember the term Karen that used to be describing a liberal. Now it's just to describe a right wing crazy lady.
Yes. And you know who did a phenomenal job at combating this was Donald Trump. So fake news was actually a left wing propaganda tactic. And he picked it up and he turned it against them. He isolated, which is part of the Saul Alinsky eight tactics for rules for radicals, which, by the way, my book is sort of named in concordance with that. So instead of rules for radicals, we have words for warriors. But Trump turned fake news against them. He isolated CNN, and they became the fake news network. And so we have a great example for how to combat these things, but we have to start now. So from now on, I empower you to use the term liberal fascist, because that's what they all are. When you're speaking to a liberal who is fully indoctrinated and fully dedicated to quote unquote the cause, the Marxist cause, they're a liberal fascist. Okay.
Got it. Yeah, I would. I mean, I even liberal. I think that's too generous. Leftist, liberal is calls to mind classical liberals. Or liberal, being liberal, and was a synonym for being pluralist
Right.
once upon a time.
Notice you have to add classical liberal, because liberal no longer means liberal.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
It's
correct.
liberal fascist. So let's just call them liberal fascists. They've got white privilege, white supremacists, which basically don't exist. They're made-up terms. Liberal fascist is actually a real term. It applies. So let's use it.
It's interesting, this pronouncement that came out of Canada that could easily be applied to the United States, but that I think would be embraced by so many cores of the United States, which is frightening. And it's this. The Canadian Olympic Committee said its athletes should avoid publicly criticizing China ahead of the 2022 Winter Games in Beijing due to concern that critics could be prosecuted under the Communist Party's national security laws. So this is sort of taking the NBA free speech protocol and making it your national policy.
Yep, that's what that is. And so we have to look. You cannot serve two masters. We have to basically, you need to define your loyalty and then stick to it. And they are currently changing fealty from the United States of America, which they deem to be racist and bigoted and all kinds of evil. They are changing their fealty to China. And we ought to be aware that we are at war with China.
And a good piece by Pedro Gonzalez over at Chronicle Magazine, where he talks about American capitalism is their enemy and how big corporations, basically buy off these leftists. He writes, if so many leftists did not hate everyday Americans more than they hated the system, corporate system, they would not be so often and easily appeased. Black Lives Matter ultimately strengthened the hand of the system tenfold. allowing corporate America to rehabilitate its image while increasing its power and reach. But the point he makes, which I think is an insightful one, is even as corporate America is aggrandizing its power and reach and just buying off these Marxist extortionists, they're bought off because they hate everyday Americans more than they hate this system where power is concentrated.
Yeah. They're all tremendous hypocrites. Even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's an avowed Marxist, basically is making a huge. She's selling sweatshirts with a 400% markup, something like that. She believes in capitalism. The problem that we have is that we have to understand that leftists lie. They lie all the time about everything. I can't even think of a single public statement from a leftist that's actually been the truth for so long. And we have to understand that they lie with their words. So they scream for tolerance. They need tolerance because the most intolerant thing that we have is the truth. And of course, they're lying, so they have to scream that we must tolerate the lie because the truth won't tolerate the lie. And we just have to understand this is a battle. It's the age-old battle. It's good versus evil. The problem is that they are now in and among us, right? It used to be that our battles were with foreign adversaries, but the foreign adversaries are now Americanized. They're Americans. We have socialists and Marxists and communists in our government. And the communism and capitalism are completely incompatible. The problem that they have is capitalism works, and capitalism has created the greatest leap in prosperity that has been known to humankind in history, okay? And the evidence is right there. Even the communists have moved towards capitalism. So we have to decide, are we going to allow the oligarchy to take power? And right now there's a tremendous power shift that's happening with COVID, frankly.
Yeah. And if we don't agree with them, they silence us. But I wanted to ask you about COVID, and I know you're the mother of 3 children, and how are you handling all of this and the pandemic? And how are your kids doing?
In case you didn't know, I'm a homeschool advocate. So I've been homeschooling for over a decade. The COVID epidemic actually helped my family grow closer. We took advantage of the isolation to become closer as a family. And despite all the hardships that it presented, and it did, and we all suffered under what's been happening in the culture and in our communities. I'm not really sure what else I can tell you. I would refer people to samsorbo.com if they're at all interested in looking at homeschooling. I highly recommend it. It is easier than you think, and it is more rewarding than you could ever possibly dream. And what they are doing to our children in our schools is nothing short of child abuse. So I would highly recommend that parents not even consider sending their children to public school. I think that if you don't school them, they might actually do better than if you would send them to public schools. So the bar is very low for what a parent has to accomplish when they attempt to homeschool, because if their comparison is public school, they can't help but do better than what's happening in our public schools. And I want to say, I don't go after teachers. I think teachers, by and large, are wonderful people who are trying to work in a perverted and corrupted system. But our public schools have been fully corrupted. The things that they're teaching our children are detrimental, very damaging, and even the system itself is damaging. So, we're talking about COVID, and have you noticed that nobody's asking any questions? The reason that nobody's asking any questions, that Fauci was allowed to just stand on the stage and make pronouncements with absolutely no economic background whatsoever. He determined what our economy was going to do in response, which is an abysmal betrayal. And nobody asked any questions, least of all the media, which is so shocking because that is in essentially their job is to ask questions. But for instance, we started with 2 weeks to flatten the curve. That made sense to everybody because the curve was supposedly going to spike. At the time, we thought 2.2 million deaths. We had outlandish figures that then proved not to be true. And then it morphed into slow the spread, okay? Not even stop the spread, but slow the spread. And nobody raised their hand to ask, Why are we slowing the spread? Maybe speeding the spread is better. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying I have the answer. I'm saying nobody asked the question. Why did nobody ask the question? Because we have all been trained that you are not allowed to ask a question unless you can raise your hand first. And by the way, that's discriminatory, because what about people who can't raise their hands?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Right.
So we've all been trained to behave. We've all been trained to follow the directions, and only move at the sound of a bell. We are all programmed. Okay? That's why we all just think, well, we'll send our kids to public school. I did it. I know so many people who do it. They get their they have their kids and they go, yep, he's going to public school. Or, then they try to make other plans. My point is, let's break that paradigm. Let's look at our language. That's why I wrote the book Words for Warriors, because I want people to really consider the paradigm that we're living in right now. They are destroying our language. And by the way, language, argumentation, debate, discussion, conversation is the last ditch resort before what? Before violence. If the left succeeds in silencing us, violence is the next step. They love violence. That's a win for them. Let's not let them win.
You and Kevin must be a real hit on the Hollywood cocktail circuit. Sam Sorbo, filmmaker, radio host, actress, international activist, and author. She hosts the weekday nationally syndicated radio program and podcast, The Sam Sorbo Show. She's also the author of They're Your Kids, Teach from Love, and True Faith, which she co-authored with her husband, Kevin. The new book, as she mentioned, Words for Warriors, Fight Back Against Crazy Socialists and the Toxic Liberal Left. Sam, thanks so much for joining us. Good luck with the book.
Hey, thank you so much. And people can go to Sorbo Family Film Studios to find out more about our movies and our work in Hollywood.
Okay,
Great.
Sorbo, S-O-R-B-O, Sorbo Family Film Studios. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Balance of Nature's fruits and vegetables in a capsule, changing the world one life at a time.
I'm 57 and work construction, and I had a hip replacement and sore joints, not feeling too well. And I was limping around and feeling really depressed. I've tried different supplements and different things, but with Balance of Nature, my body just feels better. I don't limp. And it's kind of weird because at first I wasn't sure. And then a couple months into it, I just noticed I'm walking and I'm like, hey, man, I'm not like sore. I'm not limping, nothing. I'm sold on it. I've actually talked some family members into taking it and stuff. I'm walking and everything's great.
Experience the Balance of Nature difference for yourself. Right now, Balance of Nature is offering free shipping and 35% off on any new preferred order. Call 800-2468-751. That's 800-2468-751. Or by going to balanceofnature.com and make sure to receive this special